Have you ever heard of a tin can telephone? If you put a piece of string between two tin cans and you talk into one of them, you can hear it through the other end, but your voice sounds kind of bad. It's entertaining for a bit, sure, but not really that exciting.
But think for a moment what you've just done across that piece of string. You had information, words, sounds, music, whatever, start on one end of that piece of string, and you have directed that information across to the other side of the piece of string.
In other words, you've made a connection that can carry information, a connection that can carry data. And you know what else is data? Internet packets. You know, the way that you're watching this video right now. So, you know what would be really funny? If you could use a string to connect to the internet. And just so you're aware, the connection sounds this bad.
And unlike certain other attempts at data over string, we're not going for 5 bytes per second. We're going all the way. 12 kilobits per second. Full duplex 16 carrier orthogonal frequency division multiplex trellis coded 32 QAM. If none of that made sense to you, good. That means you're going to learn something. We're going to have a good time. So, let's start by abstracting the problem a little bit. I have 2 computers on opposite sides of my workbench. The one on the left is connected to the internet over Wi-Fi, and the one on the right isn't. In order to give the computer on the right access to the internet, it needs some way to talk to the computer on the left. The simplest way we could do this is by connecting the two with an Ethernet cable. In order to share an internet connection, we just have to make sure that bits can travel from one side of the cable to the other. Importantly, neither computer really cares how the cable works, as long as the data just makes it from one side to the other. So we're going to do something a little sneaky and insert our string into the middle of the cable. Whenever we get a blob of data from the Ethernet connection, we'll turn it into a sound wave. That sound wave will get turned back into a blob of data on the other side, and we'll send it out through the other cable. That means we'll need 2 devices, one on each side, to do the translation between Ethernet and string. To make our lives easier, it'll actually be useful to have 2 pieces of string, one in each direction, but for now we're just going to worry about one-way communication. So, to summarize, our current goal is to figure out how to get data from one side of a piece of string to the other, and to do that, we're going to need to start with the string. This is some Kevlar kite string from Amazon. Kite string is specifically made to be strong and light, so it'll work well for what we want to do. Now, in order to get the sound into and out of the string, we could use tin cans as shown before, but tin cans have a major drawback. You can't plug wires into a tin can. You could certainly fit a speaker onto one, but then you're going through 2 conversions, voltage to airborne sound to string-borne sound, and the same thing applies when you stick a microphone into the can on the other side. Fortunately, I decided that the funny part of this project was the string and not the tin cans, so I ditched the cans for something better.
This is a little disc of piezoelectric material against a piece of metal. When you apply a voltage, it bends, and when you bend it, it generates a voltage. They're often used as contact microphones because they're so good at picking up conducted vibrations, and so they're perfect for this. We take these tiles, drill a hole through the center, thread the string through, and superglue the string into place. This gives us a solid connection between the string and the piezo, so the sound will transfer very efficiently. Then, I can mount the piezos in a 3D printed bracket that can slide on a linear rail. These rails are here so that when I hang a weight off the string to tension it, the piezo can slide back and forth until the tension on both sides is balanced.
So now I can have a microcontroller directly send some sound wave on one side of the string, and have another microcontroller record the received sound on the other side.
It's not very good, but it'll have to do.
So now that we have a way of sending sound from one side of my desk to the other, We need to figure out how to turn binary data into a sound wave and back. Fortunately, some smart people in the 80s already figured out how to do that. In order to connect to the internet, we're going to need to reinvent most of dial-up, plus a little extra. So let's start at the beginning, with a single pure sine wave. This sine wave is what's going to carry our data, so we call it the carrier. In order to send data with it, we need to change some of its properties. We could change the amplitude. We could change the frequency. Or we could change the phase. The process of sending information by changing one or more of these properties is known as modulation. Let's imagine we wanted to send a stream of bits, like this one. For each bit, let's see what ways we could modulate our wave. Perhaps we could make the wave higher or lower frequency. Perhaps we could scale the wave up and down. Perhaps we could shift the wave forward or back. Each one of these methods is a different modulation scheme, and when you apply them to radio waves instead of sound waves, you get common wireless protocols you might have heard of. Changing the frequency is called frequency shift keying and is a part of Bluetooth. Changing the amplitude is called amplitude shift keying and is used in near-field communication, like for tap-to-pay on a credit card. Changing the phase is called phase shift keying and is common in satellite TV. We could use any one of these variants, and in fact they're often combined together, but let's start with amplitude shift keying. If we take amplitude shift keying and reduce it down to its simplest possible parts, we might get a wave that looks like this, switching back and forth between on and off. This method is aptly named on-off keying, or OOK. OOK is cheap, simple, and slow, but it's a good foundation for the more advanced schemes we'll talk about in future parts of this series. In other words, it's just okay. The wave I have on screen right now could represent the binary string 11010110. However, it doesn't have to represent that sequence. You see, I've implicitly chosen to use on to represent a 1 and off to represent a 0. However, I could just as easily have chosen to use off to represent 1 and on to represent 0, in which case this wave would represent a different sequence. The choice is entirely arbitrary, but both will work as long as we're consistent. We normally call the possible states of our wave symbols to make it clear that they are representing our data in the way that we choose. There are two symbols here, an on symbol and an off symbol. And for the rest of this video, I'll choose to let on represent a 1-bit. So when we want to encode a message, all we have to do is map each bit to the appropriate symbol, and then send each symbol one after the other, right? Well, there's one problem with our technique as it is right now. We can't really know when a message begins and ends. For example, if I showed you the following wave, is it a 1 surrounded by silence? Is it supposed to be 0001? Or is it maybe 0100? Fortunately, we can work around this quirk of on-off keying pretty easily. Let's prefix all of our messages with an on symbol, so that we always know where the message begins. To know where the message ends, let's just say that every message is always 8 bits long, and if you want to send more than 8 bits, you have to send another message. We'll also suffix each group with an off symbol to make sure that we don't have two messages running into each other. Packaging up our bits into a known format so that we can distinguish where they begin and end is known as framing, and while there are more efficient methods for framing that we'll discuss later, this simple framing format will work for now. So, with that out of the way, we have a perfectly functional on-off keying scheme. So let's put it across the string and see how it sounds. Here, I'm sending some test data over the string with on-off keying, and I'll play a little bit of what the receiver picks up so that you can know what it sounds like. We can get a view of the received wave in the graph labeled signal, and the bottom window shows the data after it's been demodulated. We'll talk about the exact math to turn the waves back into bits in just a moment. The other graph, labeled constellation, is a surprise tool that'll help us later. As you can tell, it's not very fast. To compute our exact speed, we just need to write down some numbers. We have 8 bits of data per 10 symbol frame, and I was able to get this as fast as 1 symbol every 3 milliseconds. That means that our data rate is about 267 bits per second, or 33 bytes per second, which is not great. We're going to need a lot more than that if we want to connect to the internet. So that's why in the next part in the series, we're going to learn how to combine both amplitude shift keying and phase shift keying to get a speed 5 times faster. In the rest of this series, we're going to be putting together all sorts of different concepts in order to increase our data rate by a factor of 70. And in order to make that happen, we're going to need to be able to manipulate signals in all kinds of ways. So, to end off this video, I'd like to provide an introduction to the tools that we'll use going forward. Let's return to on-off keying for a moment. We know that, generally, we want to take a sine wave and be able to turn it on or off. To be more precise, turning the sine wave off means that we're setting its amplitude to 0, and turning the sine wave on means that we're setting its amplitude to a non-zero number. I'll just use 1 for convenience. Fortunately, changing the amplitude of a sine wave is easy. Just multiply the wave by a constant. In signal processing, whenever we want to represent multiplication, we use this X and circle symbol, and we call it a mixer. So we're mixing, or multiplying, a sine wave with either 0 or 1. If we take a stream of bits and we map each bit to either 1 amplitude or 0 amplitude, and then we mix that with a sine wave, then we can encode a message. Now you should note that nothing we did here specifically required that we picked 0 or 1 as our amplitude levels, or even that there were only 2 amplitude levels, or that the amplitude levels were discrete, but those are topics for a future video. Of course, just doing modulation isn't enough. We need to demodulate our data to get the information back out again. In the case of on-off keying, demodulation is just deciding whether a wave is present or not. There are many ways to do this, but for this series in particular, we're going to build a wave similarity detector that checks if an input wave matches some kind of wave that we're trying to detect, and gives it a similarity score based on how much it lines up. If we were stopping at on-off keying, this would be overkill, but this method will turn out to be essential for higher data rates in the future. So let's examine this wave similarity detector some more.
If we put in 2 sine waves with totally different frequencies, the detector should give us 0. If we put in 2 sine waves that are out of phase, we should also get 0. But if we put in 2 sine waves with the same frequency and phase, we want our detector to tell us the amplitude of that sine wave. To use this detector, we're going to check one symbol of our wave at a time. Let's call the symbol S of t, where S just stands for symbol. When we created S of t, we modulated a signal by mixing it with a pure sine wave. So it should make sense that when we're demodulating that same signal, we probably want to detect that same pure sine wave. So that explains our 2 inputs. But what exactly can we put inside of this magical detector box? As it turns out, we can actually just implement our similarity detector with just 2 simple parts, and the first part is just another mixer. To understand why, let's plot what happens after we mix our 2 input waves together. If the waves are the same frequency and phase, the peaks line up with peaks, and the troughs line up with troughs. That means that all the strongest parts of each wave get multiplied together to form a positive number, and thus the whole wave ends up positive. In order to distill this result down into just a single number, we can take the average value of the mixed wave, which I'll draw as this little yellow line. In this case, it'll just give us 1, because these 2 waves are very similar. Note that if we double the amplitude of the input, our score also doubles, which means that our detector does successfully tell us the amplitude of our symbol. Also note that if we put in a wave with the wrong frequency, then the peaks and troughs don't line up at all, and so everything balances out to just 0. And furthermore, if we put in a wave with the wrong phase, then again, everything cancels out and we just get 0. Let's go back to our modulated wave and apply our new similarity detector. Indeed, the result at any time is proportional to the amplitude of our wave, so we've successfully demodulated our signal. And now that we can demodulate our signal, we have all the tools we need to be able to send data across the string, as long as we're okay with being really slow. There's just one problem with this method as we've defined it so far, but that problem will have to be a secret for now, so post your guesses if you want. In the next part,
We'll fix that problem, and the solution will put us on the path to quadrature amplitude modulation, which will allow us to send at least 5 bits in a single symbol. But wow, it already took me a really long time to edit this video, and my poor video editing skills are already struggling as is, so that's where this session ends. Hope you learned something useful, and good night.